G'day, welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I want to talk to you about a technique that's getting a lot more popularity in the rehab and fitness spaces, and that's blood flow restriction, or BFR for short. Now, what I want to go through in this video is I want to talk to you about what this actually is and how you can potentially use it to your advantage going forwards. Now, if you do want to enjoy the video, please consider leaving a like rating down below, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Let me know down in the comments whether you've used blood flow restriction before and what you've used it for, and then obviously how you felt that went for you. And then if you do go on to enjoy this video and you find it useful, if you find it helpful and insightful, I'd really appreciate it if you consider leaving a super thanks donation on the video. It's just a great way to help support the channel. So with that being said, when we're talking about blood flow restriction, we're essentially talking about taking a cuff or a restrictive apparatus of some sort, inflating it with air, and obviously restricting blood flow to a specific area. Now, the importance of this, we're understanding it a lot more, and I think the American Physical Therapy Association is potentially one of the leaders at the forefront of discovering what we can use BFR for. And blood flow restriction, interestingly enough, came to us or was sort of born out of a technique used with amputees or potential amputees, where we would take the blood flow restriction devices, wrap it around the limb that they're trying to preserve or save potentially, and expose that to light loads and get some fantastic strength results from that. And what the APTA is finding is basically that the results that you can get with blood flow restriction using a low load, whether that be a lightweight or something like a TheraBand, is potentially comparable to heavy load or heavy resistance. So if you're someone in the gym who's lifting heavy load all the time, the results that you would get from that, from a muscle strength and a muscle hypertrophy perspective, is potentially comparable to using blood flow restriction at a much lower level, with much lower intensity. And that holds a number of advantages for a select group of people. So if you're someone who is an athlete and you're currently in season or in competition and you want to maintain your strength and muscle bulk potentially, but traditionally heavy loads takes longer to recover from, there's more stress on your joints, and that may not necessarily be advantageous to someone in the middle of a competition or in season, potentially we can take the BFR devices, expose you to much lower intensities and get those same results, which is quite exciting. Now, from my perspective as a physio, there's some really powerful benefits to this for people post-injury. So if you're someone who is recovering from a torn hamstring, but you've made it through the healing phase, so that tissue is integrated enough to a point where it can now sustain some load, then potentially we can expose you to much greater benefits with blood flow restriction much sooner than we would by having to wait and slowly build you up to more significant intensities and more significant loads with resistance, for example. So we see the same benefits potentially with chronic pain, where pain might be getting in the way for someone who's dealing with heavy load, but lower intensities may be much more appropriate for that subgroup, and BFR can potentially allow us to do that. Now, obviously in the amputee space where this potentially originated from, then obviously trying to preserve that tissue that's not going to tolerate those heavy loads, exposing it to much lower loads but getting similar results is clearly much more advantageous. So there's some really strong research being done in this space, a lot of it by the APTA, the American Physical Therapy Association, that's finding that there's some fantastic benefits to be had by using blood flow restriction devices at lower intensities. So we're going to talk about what those intensities might look like for you, but it's important to talk about the device itself. Now, this is a device made by a company called Recover Fun. There's a bunch of other different BFR devices out there. The important thing that you need to make sure of is that any blood flow restriction or any occlusive device can come with some inherent risks. So you need to make sure that the cuff and the pump is FDA approved. We need to make sure that the valves are secure. We need to make sure that your emergency valves, we can release it quickly. We can't be stuffing around with this, because if you have a pre-existing medical condition, whether you have hypertension or you have some form of circulatory dysfunction, this very, very simply may not be for you. So you need to make sure that before you do this, you consult someone who is an expert in this, whether it be a doctor or a physical therapist. We need to make sure that this is safe for you to use. Obviously, if we're using common sense and we're being an adult about this, then you should be fine if you have a lack of pre-existing conditions. But again, you need to talk to someone in this field to make sure that you're doing this appropriately. Now, I know the APTA, what they tend to recommend is that obviously there's the FDA approval, but they need to make sure that they use a Doppler to find the exact amount of occlusive pressure that suits you. Now, when we're using the BFR device, the amount of pressure that you will put into this cuff is going to be different for your arm versus your leg. It's going to be different for someone whose arms is a little bit more bulky, someone who's a bit bigger. It's going to be different for someone who's a little bit more thin. Obviously, with your legs, there's a lot more muscle bulk in the area. There can be more sort of fatty tissue in the area. So the occlusive pressure that you use, it needs to be specific to you. So most devices will come with an instruction manual that says, this is how much you need to do, or what range you need to look at when doing it. But ultimately, we need a professional to tell you exactly how much you need to use. If you don't have access to a professional, you need to be very, very careful that you're listening to your body so that you know exactly what the appropriate occlusive pressure is for you. Now, with any resistance, we know that the optimal way to figure out the appropriate resistance training for you without the cuff, generally clinically what I get my patients to think of is there's two features that you need to be aware of. The first feature revolves around your technique. The second feature revolves around fatigue at your required rep scheme that you're working on. So what I mean by that is if you're doing a 10 kilo dumbbell bicep curl and you've been told that you need to get between 8 to 12 reps to reach your maximum potential with that exercise. If your technique fails before that 8 to 12th rep, then that weight is clearly too heavy for you. On the flip side, if you find that you're getting to 15, 16 reps and your technique's holding together, then obviously the weight is too light. So we can bounce these ideas off you where if your technique is perfect and you're getting fatigue at the required rep scheme, then clearly that's an appropriate exercise for you. You can take a similar approach to BFR devices where if you're doing some bicep curls with a TheraBand and you find that by the much sooner than the rep scheme they're about to go through, which is about sort of 30, 15, 15, 15, if you find that you start gassing out before that level, then either the amount of pressure in the cuff is too high or the resistance is too high. So obviously we want you to bring down the pressure of the cuff a little bit more just to make sure that you can fit in that resistance and get that fatigue at the right level. Obviously, if you start to cheat, then clearly there's something going wrong with the cuff in terms of how much pressure there is. Again, if you're doing, say, 45 reps and you're feeling like you're not getting the fatigue that you need, then obviously we can bump up the pressure a little bit, but then make sure that the resistance is appropriate for you. So, as I mentioned before, what's coming out in the research in terms of the intensity that you want to be working at is we want to basically go through about 30 reps with about a 30-second break, and then 15 reps, 30-second break, 15 reps, 30-second break, 15 reps, and then you're done. And all the while, we want to make sure that your cuff is pumped up the whole time. We don't necessarily want to deflate the cuff in between because we want to keep that occlusion happening throughout the process of that exercise. So the way that this tends to look, and again, I may not be able to do this appropriately the first time, but when you place the cuff on, you'll make sure that it's relatively comfortably tight around you to begin with. And then we're taking the valve at the end of the pump and placing it into the input on the cuff itself. Now, the important thing about this, as I said, is you need to make sure that you're not overdoing the occlusion because this is serious. It's not something to stuff around with. So for me, I like to make sure that I'm pumped up. For me, I like to start at about 100 milligrams of mercury. And for me, I find that that's a great place to start. Now, for the arm specifically, for the leg, obviously you might need to pump it up a little bit more or less depending on how your arm or leg is situated. But once you've got that amount of pressure, we need to make sure that when you're doing your repetitions, so if you've got your band and you're doing your bicep curls, whatever you might be doing, when you're doing that, we need to make sure that you're not feeling any tingling, we're not feeling any numbness. you're not feeling dizzy, you're not feeling lightheaded, you're not feeling anything untoward. Yes, you should feel a decent amount of fatigue. You should feel the pump, you should feel the burn. Your muscles and your veins should really pop after doing this, but we need to make sure that anything beyond that, again, pins and needles, tingling, numbness, dizziness, nausea, you need to stop straight away and take that cuff off, go and get yourself assessed, make sure that you're doing the right thing. Playing with blood flow is a serious matter, so we need to be responsible when we do this. So again, once you've done your 30 with resistance, then we want to have a 30-second break. We want to let the blood sort of pool where it is. Don't deflate the cuff, then go through another 15 under resistance with the band, with a light weight. And then once you've done that, once you've done your set of 30 and 3 sets of 15, then we want to make sure that we deflate that cuff again. And then we want to take that off and then go and do something else. Now, as I was saying before, the benefits for this are potentially huge. Now, if you're someone who's doing a lot of traveling, or you don't have a lot of space, or you don't have the capacity to have those heavy weights, blood flow restriction is potentially a great way to get similar benefits to having a home gym. It's a fantastic way that you can potentially get the same response that you would get with heavy weights, heavy dumbbells, with a band, which is amazing. So hopefully that was really, really helpful, at least to give you a general understanding of what BFR is, some basic BFR tips and tricks. As I said, I can't stress this enough. Go see someone to do this for you professionally. Get them to show you how to do it so that you feel very safe and very comfortable, that if you are going to do it yourself, that you can do it in a way that's not going to damage you long term. But potentially this space is very exciting for a number of different avenues. As I said, the APTA is doing a lot of great work in this space. If you want to find them on YouTube, I'll link them down below. They've got some really good videos. They're a little bit dry, but they're really good informational videos if you're looking for more information on BFR as a whole. As I said, if you found that interesting, let me know in the comments down below. If you want to learn a little bit more about it, I'm more than happy to go into a lot more depth. But I think that's a great introduction to BFR, some safety tips and what you can sort of use it for. Now, again, please leave a like rating down below if you found that helpful. Consider a super thanks donation, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.